their time of war and conquest, they were the mightiest military power of their age. A force that vanquished armies, toppled empires. A dynasty which expanded to become the first great kingdom of Asia Minor. A state built on the most advanced legal system of its time. A civilization that formed the cultural link between the ancient East and West. A language that was the earliest example of all Indo-European languages. A mythology that influenced Greek and Roman literature, as well as the Bible. Kings that fought the pharaohs in the greatest battles of history. Defiant, proud men and women who ruled the Near East. An empire that changed the ancient world. The Hittites. A momentous battle is fought between the two superpowers of the day. On one side is the Egyptian army commanded by the legendary Ramesses II. Confronting Ramesses is a force that instills fear in all its enemies, but in time will become only an obscure footnote in the pages of history. A civilization forgotten for 3,000 years, until stunning archaeological discoveries will mark its rebirth. Asia Minor, today called Anatolia, a region covering the central and eastern part of Turkey. It is a land surrounded by Greece in the west, Iraq and Iran in the east, Syria in the south, and Russia in the north. In 1834, the way for experts to decipher more than 25,000 Hittite tablets and fragments unearthed in Hattusha and other cities. Among these were treaties, letters, rituals, laws, prayers, and many more that shed light on the Hittites and the ancient Near East. Names of cities, scribes, kings and queens emerged from the tablets. Hittite men and women were finally ready to tell their own story after a silence of 3,000 years. In the 18th century BC, Anatolia was a land in chaos. Constant wars between the local city-states plunged the prosperous Bronze Age into a period of darkness. To survive, kingdoms had to become conquerors to avoid conquest by others. One group, known as the Hittians, were among the many caught in the turmoil. Along with the Hittians, another group inhabiting the region was a tribe of Indo-European speakers who probably arrived in Anatolia during the 3rd millennium BC. In the 17th century BC, this group conquered the Hittians, took their name, and assimilated their culture. These were the Hittites.
The Hittites belonged to one of the tribes of the Indo-European stock. When
the early years of the Hittite kingdom are shrouded by myth and legend. It's believed that around 1650 BC, the Hittite ruler managed to join all the disparate local people under his rule, establishing the Hittite kingdom. He then moved the capital of his new kingdom to Hattusha, and took the name Hattushili, meaning man from Hattusha. Surrounded by the hostile Azawa tribes in the west, and the formidable Hurrian and Mesopotamian states in the southeast, Hattushili knew that he had to assert himself in the region. He immediately went on the attack. In a short time, the Hittites conquered lands in eastern Anatolia and northern Syria. Any state that surrendered without a fight was spared plunder and devastation, but any kind of resistance attracted the full fury of the Hittite army. Hattushili was a shrewd politician who knew that military success had to be backed by strong propaganda. As his conquest grew, he knew
his frame is new, his breast is new, his penis is new, his head is of tin, his teeth are those of a lion, his eyes are those of an eagle, and he sees like an eagle.
Under Hattushili's enigmatic, often ruthless rule, the young kingdom expanded. His military successes were forever embedded in Hittite folklore and annals.
Hattusili the first really gave birth to intellectual life in Hatti. Besides the
Hattushili spent most of his reign on military campaign. Once he secured the kingdom's borders, he set his sights beyond the Taurus Mountains, towards the enticing resources and ports of Syria. the approaching Hittite army, the Syrian states formed a coalition under the city-state of Aleppo, the most powerful in northern Syria. Hattusili quickly conquered and plundered most of the North Syrian cities, and then attacked Aleppo. But 2 campaigns failed. Eventually, he abandoned all objectives in Syria and returned home. Hattusili's last campaign as a ruler had resulted in defeat. Around 1620 BC, Hattusili was ailing. On his deathbed, the aging monarch proclaimed his grandson, still only a child, as his legitimate successor. Hattusili's last words were engraved on the same tablet that Bibignosne would use to decipher the Hittite language 3,500 years later.
Latsiamo are. Takaniatamo, Saba Anaharak. Nomo Takaniatamo, Takbats. Pasi.
This was a fragile time for the new kingdom. Their great leader was dead, and their borders were frail. Syria remained unconquered, and Hattusili's young grandson Mushili was on the throne. But by the time he was roughly 20, the youthful king was ready to complete his grandfather's unfinished business. Conquest of Aleppo had eluded Hattusili. After establishing control in Anatolia, Mushili marched to Syria and destroyed Aleppo. He then set his sights on a preeminent land to the southeast of Syria, Babylonia, the kingdom once ruled by the famous Hammurabi, the lawgiver. Around 1595 BC, Mushili and his army crossed the Euphrates, marched 600 miles, and sacked Babylon. Mushili's victory put an end to the illustrious Babylonian Empire. Mushili's attitude towards the vanquished, such as the Syrians and the Babylonians, was the same as his grandfather's. If the enemy surrendered without a fight, they were spared devastation. But if they resisted, an example was made of them. Their land was torched, and prisoners and booty were transported back to Hattusha. A new leader, usually a native who pledged allegiance to the Hittite king, was installed on the throne. In the end, the Hittite pantheon would become so complex that the Hittites would be called people of 1,000 gods. At the center of Hittite religion stood the king. His most important duty was his role as the chief priest of the land. He was a conduit between the gods and their subjects. Around 1590 BC, King Mushili returned home from a long and successful military campaign. The kingdom's prospects were promising, but one pivotal event changed everything. The assassination of Mushili by his brother-in-law plunged the kingdom into a period of chaos. For the next 65 years, most kings seized the throne by murdering their predecessors, and few were able to rule more than a few years. The kingdom was weak and divided. It seemed on the verge of collapse. By the time King Telepinu ascended the throne in 1525 BC, the kingdom had lost most of its territory to the west and the east. Immediately after his accession, rivals to the throne murdered his son and wife. The assassins were caught and scheduled for execution. But in an extraordinary demonstration of restraint, Telepinu did not execute the conspirators. Instead, he banished them from the land.
Let a prince, a son of the chief wife, become king. If there is no prince of the chief wife, let the son of a second wife become king. But if there is no prince, no heir, let them take a son-in-law, husband of a daughter of the first wife, and let him become king.
Telepinu recorded the rules of future royal succession in one of the most important documents in Hittite history. It has become known as Telepinu's Proclamation. The Telepinu Proclamation marked a new chapter in what was already a unique legal system in the Near East. Unlike his contemporaries, Hittite law was based on compensation rather than retribution. The laws, with their 200 provisions, covered many aspects of Hittite life, from marriage to agriculture. It was a dynamic legal code, evolving and undergoing reform as conditions changed and new cases arose.
One of the aspects of Hittite law that I find most fascinating, which is unique in the ancient world,
Vassal states in distant lands could complain of injustice and obtain a fair ruling. The king's instructions to his governors and his family members were clear.
Into whatever city you return, summon forth all the people of the city. Whoever has a suit, decide it for him and satisfy him. Do not make the better case the worse, or the worse case the better. Do what is just.
Telepinu stabilized the kingdom and established peace, even if it was only temporary. The growing military might of Egypt in the south and the new Hurrian state in the east, the kingdom of Mitanni, made future military conflicts inevitable. In time of war, the king could call up ordinary Hittite citizens to strengthen his army. The common people were the subjects of the king and servants of the gods. Few Hittite texts directly describe the everyday life of the citizens. Most of the details can only be found in Hittite laws and official documents.
Hittite society was sharply stratified, of course, into rows at the top, the army commanders and administrators and
Middle classes lived in large urban centers. Many of the common people lived in scattered villages, sometimes far from the cities. During peacetime, the people worked the land, allotted to them by the king as compensation for their military or other services. Agriculture and animal husbandry were the economic backbone of the kingdom. The rural areas produced the food for the whole country. So important was farming that 40 out of the 200 articles in Hittite laws specifically dealt with agriculture and livestock. The peasants could either cultivate their own land or work royal land for a share of the crops. During the harvest season, men could also work for hire on someone else's farm. The rural Hittite settlements resembled the Wild West. Life could be harsh. High mountains cut off many villages both from the cities and from one another, making travel extremely difficult and dangerous. Frontier towns were vulnerable to attacks by bandits and enemy soldiers. Often, the Anatolian winter cut off communications completely between neighboring towns and cities, even burying the houses under mountains of snow. A harsh winter and bad harvest could lead to widespread famine. When the weather allowed travel, the farmers brought their goods to the Hittite marketplaces set up around the major cities and temples. They traded for commodities or crafts and paid taxes to the court. The Hittite marketplace was a bazaar, tax office, and stock market, all rolled into one. Cosmopolitan in many ways, these bustling marketplaces were filled with people, both local and foreign, combing the streets for merchandise. It was even a good place to meet your future spouse. Hittite marriages were formed by strict agreements, by which the men paid the woman's family what was called a bride price. The woman's role in the relationship was determined by her husband's wishes as well as her own strength of character. She was expected to be a wife, a helping hand, and most of all, to bear children. In contrast to many Near Eastern societies, Hittite women were at least partially compensated in divorce. In marriage, as in all aspects of Hittite life, fertility was crucial. Many flaws could be overlooked as long as men and women were fertile. One of the well-known fertility rituals was described by a Hittite healer named Pascuwati.
If for some man reproductive power is absent, or he is not a man with regard to women, I place a spindle and a distaff in the patient's hand and instruct him to come through the gates. As he steps in, I take the spindle and distaff away from him, and I give him a bow and arrows. At the same time, I recite as follows. I have just taken femininity away from you and given you back masculinity. You have cast off the behavior of a woman and have taken on the behavior of a man.
The effectiveness of this therapy remains unknown. The frontier society was not without its disputes. All cases were brought for arbitration before the king's local governors, or the town's elders, who were under direct instructions from the king to exercise fairness. But more serious cases such as sorcery, murder, or adultery could be taken to only one place, the king's court at Hattusha. It was a marvel of engineering. A city literally carved out of rock. Its temples, houses, and the royal citadel stretched over an area of 400 acres, much larger than ancient Troy or Athens. Surrounded by imposing natural fortifications and miles of walls, it was considered impregnable. As the religious, economic, and administrative center of the land, it was one of the most important cities of the ancient world and the pride of the Hittites. Hattusha was the Hittite kingdom. Hattusha was divided into two districts, the lower and the upper city. Armories, archives, temples, government buildings, and grain depots that served the entire kingdom were all located in the capital. The king resided in the fortified citadel with his immediate family. The important buildings, especially those with religious functions, were constructed on rock outcroppings. Huge crags were leveled to accommodate houses. Most, the Hittites were warriors, and their city was designed to make this clear to anyone who traveled to the capital. They surrounded Hattusha with massive stone walls that stretched for miles, with watchtowers and security tunnels located every 60 feet. The city could only be entered through 8 primary gates, which were heavily guarded and fortified. The gates could only be approached by steep ramps that were flanked by walls and 2 towers, one outside and one inside. In times of crisis, people living outside the city were brought inside for protection. So strict was Hittite security that after everyone had entered the city, the gates were closed and sealed by local officials every evening. The seals were checked first thing in the morning to determine if Hattusha had been infiltrated by the enemy or their spies. Most of the city's population were employed in temples, the religious and sometimes the administrative centers of the empire. The artisan workshops that protected deity statues and the official archives of the kingdom were all located there. Copies of all texts ranging from treaties to prayers were meticulously stored in the royal archives. A king could easily become familiar with past events and refer to his predecessors' exploits.
One of the strongest points of the Hittites is their enormous sense of history.
From distant lands like Syria and Babylonia. These people brought with them not only their skills, but also a legacy of myths that formed the core of Hittite literature. Most of these stories have survived.
So they used their archives over centuries. They kept tablets to be able to consult them, to be able to draw from them for the present.
One group of workers in the temples were indispensable to the administration of the kingdom, the scribes. They were the writers and translators of all Hittite documents, and were among the king's most important advisors. A scribe was required to spend many years mastering the difficult cuneiform script and the languages that were used in foreign correspondence. By the time they were appointed to the palace, scribes were well versed in many languages, history, and politics.
The Hittite state could not have functioned without the activity of the scribe.
A unique glimpse into the personal lives of the scribes can be found at the end of a few official Hittite documents.
I say to my dear brother Uzu, may it be well with you, and may the god Ea, king of wisdom, protect you in well-being. Presently, things are going well in your household, and everything is fine in regard to your wife. My dear brother should not worry at all. May my dear brother send greetings back to me.
Say to my brother Himuili, in regard to what you wrote me about your sons-in-law, I've taken your point, and will speak about it in the palace. A person will go to them, and bring them into the presence of his majesty.
Many of these scribes received their early training by copying ancient texts. In addition to local scribes, many were brought in from distant lands like Syria and Babylonia. These people brought with them not only their skills, but also a legacy of myths that formed the core of Hittite literature. Most of these stories have survived, thanks to the archives of Hattusha. Though the Hittite writings were influenced by Hurrian and Babylonian myths, they had their own distinct style and themes.
Mythical traditions.
With their strong narratives and entertainment value, these myths passed down from generation to generation. Many of them even influenced Greek and Roman myths as well as the Bible. The year was 1400 BC, a century after the death of King Telepinu. The Hittite kingdom enjoyed a period of relative peace and prosperity, but it was not to last. Egypt formed a military alliance with the kingdom of Mitanni and invaded Hittite territory in Syria. Lands in the east became disobedient. Azawa states in the west rebelled. These attacks from 3 sides shook the kingdom to its very foundations, but they were nothing compared to the assaults that the Hittites would face from the north. The Kashgar were a group of northern tribes infamous for their defiance and ruthlessness. Capitalizing on the chaotic situation, they ravaged Hittite border towns in the north and pushed quickly south. Even Hattusha could not withstand the Kashgar onslaught. It was impossible for the Hittite army to defend all four fronts at the same time. In just a few years, the kingdom lost most of its possessions, retaining only a small piece of land in central Anatolia. The devastation was beyond the Hittites' worst nightmares, and their enemies were certain the kingdom was destroyed. The Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep III summed it up in a letter to an ally.
I have heard that everything is finished, and the country Hattusha is paralyzed.
But they were all wrong. The Hittites would emerge from this defeat stronger than ever. One man would raise the kingdom from the ashes and transform it into a mighty empire. He would come to be known as the King of Kings, the greatest Hittite ruler in history. His name was Shupilulima. Shupilulima was raised to be a fighter. He was a battle-hardened soldier and a skilled politician who carefully planned his every move. When the kingdom of Mitanni and the Kashgar attacked, his father was king. Shupilulima was his chief advisor and comrade in arms.
It was clear that the king did not control much more than the old heartlands of the Hittite Empire. The west had gone off, the north was difficult, the east, the south. And this is the situation in which Shupilulima, as prince, came into the scene.
After the fall of Hattusha, Shupilulima and his father retreated to the provincial capital of Shamua. There, he painstakingly rebuilt his army and set out to recapture lost territories one by one. Most of the lands were quickly reclaimed by the Hittites either by force or treaties. But as Hittite successes mounted, Shupilulima's father fell ill. On his deathbed, to the surprise of everyone, he passed over Shupilulima and appointed another son as his successor. Shupilulima was furious. He rebelled, seized the throne, and had his brother murdered. He violated Telepinu's proclamation of royal succession. And had his brother murdered. He violated Telepinu's proclamation of royal succession. As the new king, Shupilulima continued the campaign to rebuild the kingdom. After consolidating his position in Anatolia, he conquered the Ozawa lands in the west and the Kashgar in the north. Hattusha was once again under Hittite rule. Shupilulima then marched south and crushed the powerful Syrian coalition. Within a year, most of the lands in northern Syria were under his rule. Of the enemies that had attacked the Hittites, only the kingdom of Mitanni remained unconquered. Shupilulima would not rest until payback was complete. In a relentless campaign, he attacked the Mitanni kingdom and subjugated all small states loyal to it. Shupilulima reinforced his military victories with political ones. He formed an alliance with the Syrian state of Ugarit. Ugarit's alliance would not only give the Hittites access to crucial trade routes, but would also provide a valuable source of tribute. The alliance proved to be a shrewd political move. Ugarit became the Hittites' most important source of revenue for the next 2 centuries. Although he was a skilled politician, Shupilulima's greatest asset was the Hittite military, the most powerful of its day. The military was made up of the infantry and the chariot units. The infantrymen were mostly armed with spears and shields. For close combat, they used bronze, sickle-shaped swords and axes. The Hittite military life was harsh and governed by strict discipline. The troops were expected to march long distances through difficult terrain and then fight the enemy. During some campaigns, they had to carry their weapons and shields for 900 miles under the fierce heat of the Anatolian sun. The elite unit and the pride of the Hittite army was the chariot force. The Hittites did not invent the battle chariot, but they perfected it. In their hands, it became the equivalent of the modern-day tank. In most chariots of the day, the axle was located at the end of the cart, which carried 2 soldiers. The Hittites mounted the axle near the middle of the cart, making the chariot more stable and able to carry a larger load. This meant an extra soldier and more weapons, giving the Hittite chariots superiority in fire and manpower over their Egyptian or Hurrian counterparts. The Hittite charioteers could devastate the enemy by hurling spears and shooting arrows from a distance. They could then attack the enemy ranks and crush the fleeing soldiers by striking them from both sides of the chariot. The Hittite chariots were so feared that according to the Old Testament, their thunder made the Syrians tremble with fear. With his formidable military, Shupilulima was an unstoppable force in the Near East. Shupilulima wanted to extend Hittite influence to Mesopotamia by taking the daughter of the Babylonian king as his wife. This presented a problem, since he was already married, and his wife held the official title Tawananna, the Hittite queen. Shupilulima's solution that would enable him to marry the Babylonian princess was simple. He dismissed his wife, the mother of all his sons, from the capital and banished her into exile. Soon, the Babylonian princess traveled to Hattusha and married Shupilulima. She was now Tawananna, queen of the the Hittites. After nearly 20 years of rule, Shuppi-Ulima had achieved dominance over the entire region. After nearly 20 years of rule, Shuppi-Ulima had achieved dominance over the entire region. The Hittite land stretched from the Black Sea in the north to the Euphrates in the east and the mountains of Lebanon in the south. The kingdom Shuppi-Ulima raised from the ruins had become an empire. Shuppi-Ulima still remembered the devastation his kingdom had endured under his enemies. One Mitannian stronghold remained before his revenge was complete, the city of Carchemish. In 1327 BC, Shuppi-Ulima besieged the city. As he waited for the city's surrender, a messenger brought a letter from Egypt. It was to mark the beginning of one of the greatest mysteries in ancient history.
My husband is dead, and I have no son. But it is said that you have many sons. If you could send me one of your sons, he could become my husband. On no account will I take one of my subjects and make him my husband. I am very afraid.
The author of the letter was the Egyptian queen Ankhesenamun. Her dead husband was none other than the boy king of Egypt, Tutankhamun. Why would an Egyptian queen ask to marry a Hittite king's son? Why would she send a plea to her country's greatest rival? Suspicious that he was being deceived, Shuppi-Ulima dispatched his chamberlain to Egypt to meet with Ankhesenamun. Meanwhile, he captured Carchemish and returned home for the winter. The following spring, Shuppi-Ulima's chamberlain returned with an angry letter from Ankhesenamun.
Why did you say they deceive me? Had I a son, would I have written about my own and my country's shame to a foreign land? I have written to no other country. Only to you I have written. They say you have many sons, so give me one of yours. To me, he will be husband. In Egypt, he will be king.
It was almost too good to be true. A Hittite prince would sit on the Egyptian throne, and the Hittites would become the greatest power of the known world. Persuaded, Shuppi-Ulima sent his son to Egypt to marry Ankhesenamun. The king anxiously awaited the news of his son's safe arrival in Egypt. But none came. Finally, after a few weeks, a messenger brought him a letter. The prince was dead. He had been murdered by Ankhesenamun's rivals the moment he entered Egyptian territory. The Hittites spared no one. Soldiers sacked and burned Egyptian towns in Syria. Shuppi-Ulima brought back many prisoners to Hattusha, but this would have terrible consequences for the Hittite Empire. The captives carried with them a dreadful plague. The disease spread rapidly, decimating the population. Finally, after devastating the empire for 20 years, the plague ended.
He almost speaks to us with his own voice. In fact, he does, in expressing the great anguish and anxiety which he feels all the time as a result of the plague. So we do see him as a very human figure there, in his laying himself bare to the gods, effectively, but also to us.
All Hittite kings had to be warriors. Even as he fought the plague within the empire, Mershali attacked the Azawa lands in the west and achieved total victory. He also defeated the rebellious Kashgar lands and secured the empire's northern borders. He proved that against his enemies, he could be even more ruthless than his father, especially to those who harbored fugitives.
Now seize him and hand him over to me. If you do not hand him over, I will come and destroy you along with your land. Do you gods not see how she has turned the entire house of my father into the stone house of the protective god? Some things she brought in from the land of Babylon. Others in the populace she handed over. She left nothing. My father's house she destroyed.
Mershali's most vexing personal problem was his stepmother, Tawananna, the Babylonian widow of Shuppi-Ulima. Tawananna was the royal title conferred upon the queen, the chief consort of the king. It was an influential position both religiously and politically, as she was the chief priestess of the land. The queen kept her title even as she survived her husband's death and lived into the reign of his successor. Sometimes this was a source of tension between her and the new king's wife. This was certainly the case for Mershali.
My brother will tell you to my father Mushili in a dream with a message. For Hattusili, the years are short. He will die soon. Therefore, give him into my service, and let him be my priest. If you do so, he will continue to live. And my father took me, and gave me to the goddess for service. And serving as priest to the goddess, I poured libations. And so with the hand of my lady Ishtar, I saw prosperity.
Despite constant bouts of ill health, Hattusili had fought beside his brother in the northern campaigns, and proved his worth as a commander. In 1274 BC, Kadesh was under Hittite rule, and Amurru was under Egyptian control. The loyalties of other states in Syria constantly fluctuated between the two sides. But Kadesh was the most strategic city in Syria, and it marked the border between the two powers. Whoever controlled it would control Syria. The fate of the Near East was to be decided on the plains of Kadesh. Armorers cast their weapons. Charioteers reinforced their vehicles. The infantry trained tirelessly. Both sides prepared for a momentous battle. The Hittites reinforced their standing army with troops from 18 vassal states. They amassed 37,000 infantry soldiers and 3,500 chariots. Ramesses formed an army of 4 divisions: the Ammon, the Ray, the Tar, and the Seth, each made up of 5,000 men. It was the greatest assembly of forces the world had ever seen. The Hittite forces left Anatolia and marched south to Syria, joining with their allies along the way. Hattusili was the commander of the Hittite infantry and the chariots of the north. Ramesses led his Ammon division north up the coast of Palestine. But in his haste to face the Hittites, Ramesses made a tactical error. In 1274 BC, Kadesh was under Hittite rule, and Amurru was under Egyptian control. The loyalties of other states in Syria constantly fluctuated between the two sides. But Kadesh was the most strategic city in Syria, and it marked the border between the two powers. Whoever controlled it would control Syria. The fate of the Near East was to be decided on the plains of Kadesh. Armorers cast their weapons. Charioteers reinforced their vehicles. The infantry trained tirelessly. Both sides prepared for a momentous battle. The Hittites reinforced their standing army with troops from 18 vassal states. They amassed 37,000 infantry soldiers and 3,500 chariots. Ramesses formed an army of 4 divisions: the Ammon, the Ray, the Tar, and the Seth, each made up of 5,000 men. It was the greatest assembly of forces the world had ever seen. The Hittite forces left Anatolia and marched south to Syria, joining with their allies along the way. Hattusili was the commander of the Hittite infantry and the chariots of the north. Ramesses led his Ammon division north up the coast of Palestine. But in his haste to face the Hittites, Ramesses made a tactical error. He increased the distance between him and the Tar and Seth divisions. In case of an attack, he could only rely on the Ray and his own Ammon division, just half his total force. In May of 1274 BC, a month after leaving their capital, the Egyptians were 10 miles from Kadesh. They were now in enemy territory. But the Hittites were nowhere to be seen. As Ramesses prepared to cross the Orontes River at Shabtuna, his forces captured 2 Bedouins. Under interrogation, they claimed that the Hittite army was located 100 miles further north at Aleppo, and that, intimidated by Ramesses, they were fleeing back to Hattusha. The Bedouins were lying. The overconfident Ramesses committed a second tactical error. The next day, he crossed to the north bank of the river, and once again split his forces. He set up camp at the northwestern side of Kadesh with his Ammon division. His other division, the Ray, remained on the south bank, and the Tar and the Seth divisions were still many miles to the south. As Ramesses' royal pavilion was erected near Kadesh, his troops captured 2 Hittite spies. Under torture, the spies talked.
Behold, the ruler of Hatti has already come, together with the many foreign lands that he brought as allies. See, they are poised, armed, and ready to fight behind Old Kadesh.
The Hittite army was actually south of the river and ready to attack the Ray division. Ramesses had been fooled. The pharaoh quickly dispatched 2 officers to warn the Ray division, which was still marching towards his camp. But they were too late. Survivors rushed towards Ramesses' camp in panic with the entire Hittite army in pursuit. Only the Ammon division stood between the Hittites and total domination of Syria. Hattusili and his brother were confident of the outcome. It seemed that only a miracle could save Ramesses. And one did. The pharaoh was able to hold his flanks. The vassal soldiers, so crucial for the Hittite strength, broke ranks. Lured by the booty in the Egyptian camp, they abandoned their positions and started to plunder. At the same time, Egyptian reinforcements arrived from Amurru and attacked the Hittites on their flank. With their forces in disarray, the Hittites missed the opportunity for a decisive victory. Both sides suffered heavy losses. Ramesses withdrew his forces to Egypt. With their chariots immobilized, Muwatalli and Hattusili could not pursue the pharaoh. Although the Hittites missed their chance for total victory, they had destroyed half of the Egyptian army at Kadesh. Shortly after, the Hittites recaptured Amurru and Abba, the site of modern Damascus, re-establishing Hittite rule in the region. Tensions, however, would remain high